You ever feel like you're just chained to a habit or maybe a thought pattern that you just can't seem to shake? It's a feeling we all know. Well, we're about to explore this really ancient but incredibly relevant framework that gives a name to these invisible chains. And, more importantly, it shows us how we can start to loosen them. I mean, you know those moments, right? When you find yourself just replaying the same anxious thought, or getting hooked by the exact same frustration, or wrestling with that familiar self-doubt just over and over and over again. And here's something really crucial to get. Being stuck in those loops, it's not some kind of personal failure. It's not a flaw in your character. It's actually a really predictable feature of the human mind. In fact, Buddhist psychology has a specific name for these patterns. They're called fetters. Now, these aren't some ancient, abstract ideas that have no meaning for us. Nope. They are these deeply familiar patterns that show up as things we all recognize, like self-doubt, anger, perfectionism, that constant craving for something. They're the mental habits that lock us into these repetitive cycles of emotional suffering. So, let's take a closer look at these unseen mental chains. Probably the best way to think about them as these kind of habitual mental fixations. They pretty much operate just below the surface of our awareness, almost like a subconscious program that's just quietly guiding all our reactions and decisions. So, why should you even care about this stuff? Well, because these fetters have a real, tangible impact on your life. I mean, every time we get caught in a leap of self-criticism, we lose the freedom to see our own strengths, right? Every time we're totally paralyzed by indecision, our clarity is just gone. These aren't just abstract concepts, they are the very gears and wheels of our day-to-day suffering. But here's what makes this whole framework so powerful. It doesn't just point out the problem. It actually gives us a roadmap to freedom. It lays out this clear step-by-step path toward loosening these chains and discovering a much more resilient way of being. Okay, so this map is laid out in what are called the 4 stages of awakening. Each stage, from stream entry to arhat, marks this huge breakthrough where specific fetters are either weakened or just broken entirely. Now, those first 3 stages deal with what are known as the 5 lower fetters. These are the big, clunky, everyday patterns that we're going to focus on today. That final stage, arhat, that's about breaking the 5 higher fetters, which are way more subtle. We're talking deep-seated cravings, restlessness, conceit, the final traces of ignorance. But for our purposes, we're going to dive into those first 5, because let's be honest, those are the chains we all wrestle with every single day. All right, let's dive into the first cluster of these fetters. These first 3, they're all about the very foundation of how we experience the world, how we see ourselves, and what we put our trust in. This is where the theory gets super real. So let's look at that first one, self-identity. This isn't just some belief. It feels like that defensiveness that flares up when our identity, as say a good employee, is challenged. And look at uncertainty. That's not just simple doubt, it's that paralyzing mental spin out of what if I'm wrong that just stops us in our tracks. Even rituals can become a fetter when our peace of mind totally depends on that perfect morning routine, turning a helpful habit into a super rigid rule. And this quote, it just illustrates that first fetter perfectly. The self-identity view takes a simple event, losing a job, and turns it into this devastating story about our fundamental worth. It gets us to confuse what happens to us with who we fundamentally are. Okay, next up, we're moving from fetters of belief to fetters of reaction. These next 2 are all about our core emotional drivers, that constant push and pull we feel in response to, well, everything. So here we've got 2 sides of the exact same coin, and it's the engine for so much of our restlessness. Sensual craving is that constant itch, that endless wanting that has us refreshing our phones for the next little dopamine hit. And its opposite is ill will, that automatic resistance to anything we find unpleasant. It's that flash of anger in traffic, or that low-grade resentment that can just color your entire day. And together, these 2 fetters are responsible for a huge amount of our daily reactivity. They create this cycle of constantly chasing temporary satisfaction and trying to run away from unpleasant feelings, which, as we all know, is completely and utterly exhausting. So this is all fascinating, right? But the big question is, what do we actually do about it? How do we start to loosen the grip of these chains? Okay, so the most important point is this. The goal is not to wage a war against your own mind. It's not about forcefully trying to crush your cravings or eliminate every last bit of self-doubt. The path to freedom is actually much gentler. It's all about learning to see these patterns clearly, right as they're happening. And we can use a whole bunch of practical, modern tools for this. For example, mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind. It's about learning to just observe a craving without having to immediately act on it. We can use critical thinking to ask ourselves, hey, wait a minute, is it really true that my entire worth is tied to my job? And then there are practices like self-compassion, which can directly soften the harshness of that ill will and self-criticism. And here is the most empowering part of all of this. You don't have to defeat the fetters. The simple act of just recognizing one, of seeing, there's that self-doubt again, or, there's that craving. That's what weakens its power. Awareness itself is the tool that loosens the chain. So as we wrap this up, I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Looking at these patterns of self-identity, doubt, craving, aversion, which one of these chains do you notice showing up most often in your own life? Because just starting to notice, that is the very first step toward freedom.